as for the question, would I recommend the book? See, this seems like a really difficult question for me because although I couldn't even finish the book and it really wasn't for me, there are definitely people I would recommend this book to. So I guess the answer is yes. Hi everyone, my name is Terry Westwell and today is Tuesday, which means it's time to discuss our Panic at the Book Club book of the week, which is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Guin. If you like romance, fantasy, or even thriller, basically anything fiction book related, then I suggest you head on over to the channel's intro video, where you can find out more information on how you can take part in this online book club. We announce books at least 4 weeks in advance, that way you can choose the genre that best suits you, and the best time frame to read it in. We also accept your bookish feedback in a wide manner of ways. Post your comment below a video, send in a voice note, or even send me a short video clip of you discussing the book. Alternatively, you can just send me a direct message. Two people, until recently strangers, find themselves on a long, torturous, and dangerous journey across the ice. One is an outcast forced to leave his homeland, and the other is fleeing from a different kind of persecution. What they have in common is curiosity about others and themselves, and an almost unshakable belief that the world could be a better place. As they journey over 800 miles across the harshest and most inhospitable landscape, they discover the true meaning of friendship and of love. This is a spoiler-free section of the video, where at first we discuss all of the spoiler-free points before moving on to a clearly marked section of the video, which will contain spoilers and more specifics about the book. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't feeling great about doing this video. For the first time ever in Panic at the Book Club's history, I have DNF'd a book. I know, I'm sorry I've failed you. In fact, I don't remember the last time I DNF'd a book at all. It was only during our mid-year book tag last week that I was saying that I hadn't DNF'd a book so far this year. I think it's so easy to tell people that if they're not feeling a book to just move on and read something else and not read it because life's too short, but for me personally, I often find that advice is easier said than done. At first I tried reading the physical book, but then after about 5 chapters or so I thought I might get on better with the audiobook, but I just couldn't, and I don't think that the narrator helped at all. Which was a real shame, because honestly, I didn't dislike what I saw of the premise. There were actually a few chapters that once I got stuck in, I really enjoyed. Speaking of chapters, they were definitely a little on the lengthy side for me. From the beginning, you did get some that were a little shorter, but then you would get some that were like 40 minutes long, and especially when I'm reading a physical book, I don't like putting the book down mid-chapter, but this one just didn't always give me that option. I'm not usually a big reader of sci-fi, and I think this really showed why I also don't tend to read more serious, high fantasy either. The premise, from what I got in the first 30% of the book, did seem quite interesting, and there were definitely bits that I enjoyed, but like a lot of high fantasy and books like that, it just kind of felt like it took forever to get there. And not even all because of world building, sometimes it just felt like the book went off on little tangents, kind of like the equivalent of, do you know those people who start telling you a story and then partway through they end up segueing into something totally different? Kind of like that. The book would kind of start drawing you into what was happening, but it would then pull you back out a little bit by going on this tangent. Like I said, it's not even as if it was all world building either. There were some good elements of world building in some parts, and then others, You were just given a lot of information and names and places, and you were just expected to remember, even though you don't even really know what it is. There wasn't really a lot of introduction to the world and what was going on at the start that didn't just feel like word vomit. Now, please don't assume that because of these comments that it was a bad book, because I really don't think it was. It was written fairly well, and I think it just came down purely to personal taste. You know, I like single POVs with a fairly simple character and world structure where I can fill in my own blanks with my own imagination if it's not too important to the overall storyline. You know, this book would have a whole entire chapter that would seem totally irrelevant and random as hell, only for it to kind of end up providing a little bit more context to a totally different situation later on. As I said, I don't really read much sci-fi, but if I had to compare it to any other book, it would probably be Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Although it's not about aliens or other worlds, I think the two books do definitely share some similarities. Now we've reached that part of the video where I suggest if you haven't read this book yet, go do that first, because beyond this point there will probably be spoilers. Not that there really can be much in terms of spoilers from me, but I just felt like the writing style itself was a little boring and effort to read. When I read more fantasy books, I like to take my time to enjoy the adventure and get to know the characters in a fun and exciting way that keeps me engrossed in guessing what's happening next. But to me, this book just sort of felt like I'd stumbled across somebody else's dissertation research notes and just kind of had a vague idea as to what the topic was about. From what I got of the storyline, it did seem really interesting, and I did really like the concept of seeing this all through this particular main character. I really like how the character was written and their experiences, how it goes on to explain that sometimes they just wanted anonymity, they didn't want to be different anymore, and over time it just got harder and harder, especially when people would point out their differences all the time. I wanted to know more about this Mad King, a character who, like many horrible people in the real world, find reasons and excuses for their blatant racism. Like, I really wanted to know if the main character succeeded in his agenda, and I also thought that this world's view on gender roles was really interesting. I guess I'm just trying to say that it wasn't necessarily the book, it was me. 100% down to personal preference on writing style, and I'm actually pretty bummed out that I couldn't finish it. I just found that no matter how I tried to read it, I would just zone out, and I would be trying to read the words and they just wouldn't go in. I knew that if I continued to try and force it, that I would just end up putting myself in a reading slump, So, as for the question, would I recommend the book? See, this seems like a really difficult question for me because although I couldn't even finish the book and it really wasn't for me, there are definitely people I would recommend this book to. So I guess the answer is yes. To specific people if I knew that it was more their writing style. So will I be reading any more of Ursula K. Guin? Unfortunately, although I would say that they are a talented writer, I don't think I'll be rushing to pick up another. But let me know what you thought. Did you enjoy the book?
Okay, so Terry's asked me to review Left Hand of Darkness, and this is my first time doing one of these, so I'm just gonna throw out everything I think about the book, and well, hopefully you can pull out some clips. I'm a huge fan of Ursula Guin. I have been since I was a kid. I'm always reminded of how much I love her writing, just for the style, the implied richness, and the actual richness, with the use of made-up words, references to things not described. She implies there's this rich existing world that everyone is familiar with. And yet she also actually fleshes out so much more. Maybe once you've got the confidence from what she's fleshed out, your mind just believes that the stuff that's implied elsewhere is equally rich. With Left Hand of Darkness, it's ostensibly a sci-fi book and a idea of a culture, a world, and galactic people that are different and yet the same to our own in ways we can imagine. And then exploring that idea is all good sci-fi does. But I think the trick with Left Hand of Darkness is the potential gendered androgyny of the people is so core to how the world works. It's that we don't feel that the story is about exploring that world. Really, it's 150 pages where 90 of those are setting up this scenario and setting up our two heroes, Estraven and Genly. And then the actual 45 of them together, trapped in absolute isolation, forced to finally actually understand each other. They describe it so well in Estraven's thoughts, where even though it's his planet, isolated on this glacier, the assumption that what he has is normal and that Genly is the alien doesn't apply, because it's just the two of them in that tent. And their fundamental biological differences have to be reckoned with on equal footing. And that's done entirely through the lens and for the purpose of those two individuals understanding each other and their relationship growing so deep. And I just really enjoy it. I think it's interesting today to have this idea of a sci-fi world, something we can explore and think about how it applies to the world today. But ultimately, actually, in reading the book, it's not about that. It's about just understanding these two people. And the two people are, Genly, we see so much of the world through Genly's eyes, and we're biased because he's us, because he's gendered and he is experiencing this alien land. But he's also so flawed. But he has the misogyny of the culture he comes from. You can't describe if women are inferior to someone who is just as much a woman as they are a man. If I'm recommending someone else to read it, and sorry, Terry, I know I did this to you, I'm going to sell it as it's a love story hiding as a sci-fi book. And you just have to get through. You don't have to get through. The first 90 pages are interesting, but they're interesting from the reader in the world today's mind. They're interesting in this is a brilliant, insightful author writing in the 60s about gender and world politics. The two nations we encounter are a monarchy and something akin to an autocracy, something akin to East Berlin, as written by an author from the late 60s. And even though Genly is sympathetic, we see the view of a sympathetic but ultimately sexist man from intelligent feminist author of the 60s. In reading those first 90 pages, most of what is interesting from that comes in the insight it gives us today to what that time must have been like and how it differs and how it's the same. In then when they're on the glacier, that's the book. That is the bit where that's where you lose yourself into the people. And then they just closes it off. I think it's the last two chapters and then everything happened. Spoilers, Straven dies, and then everything goes exactly as this brilliant person predicted. And I think that's fine. Ultimately, the ending just wraps itself up because that's not important. We're not interested in the politics or future of the kingdoms and nations of this land. We're interested in the relationship and the journey between Genly and Estraven. And yeah, I love Left Hand of Darkness. Also, it's quite short, but I said 150 pages, read it in a day.
So I read The Left Hand of Darkness this week, which to be honest was a bit of a chore. To start off with, I pre-enlisted audiobooks and the narrator was this huge drag. The story itself had something really compelling about it, but it never really progressed past surface level observations. At the beginning of the book, it felt like it had a chance to be this complex commentary or investigation into social gender politics, but it kind of just goes, the aliens are like this, and just moves on. Then later in the book, it seems as if it's going to explore elements of nationalism, but again it just hints at it and moves on. I suppose this highlights my main issue with the book and writing style. It mentions all these interesting points, and then never actually spends time exploring them. Also, it was just kind of janky. The passing of the story, seemed mental. Towards the end of the book, they spent 4 chapters describing a trek across an icy wasteland, which I did actually really enjoy. But then they covered the next huge distance in like a blink of an eye, and it was like that throughout all of the book. Just like spending huge amounts of time on one thing that didn't really develop the plot or whatever, and then no time on something that I would personally consider more interesting. The style of the story was also a struggle for me, because I listen to a lot of podcasts that are the reporting styles, and I think it was trying to do that, but really didn't do it justice. It just felt that throughout the whole book, the author didn't have a clear vision of what the book was trying to say, or how they were trying to say it, or whether if it was a sci-fi story or a investigation into these like social, political ideas. It just seemed to be a bit of everything, but I don't think there was any depth past what you as the reader put in yourself, which I think can be a quite interesting style choice. But I'm not sure I'm going to give the author credit enough to actually make it a style choice, and it all felt a bit two-dimensional to me. There were parts of the book I really did enjoy, like chapter 5 when they got into the psychic thing and explaining all that. That was like the most sci-fi bit of the whole book, and I don't even really like sci-fi. But if I read a sci-fi book, I would quite like there to actually be elements of sci-fi storytelling in it. Not opposed to, this just felt like it was set on one planet and wasn't, which is fine, but it wasn't really like that sci-fi. It was just kind of a different setting. Like it's more akin to a fantasy book than a sci-fi book. Again, there were bits I really enjoyed. I found myself really enjoying it at times, but there were huge bits where I just thought I was trying to get to the end, to be honest. And also not a lot happened. And also with what did happen, they didn't really give it the depth or the attention that I believe it actually deserved. Like the concept was good, but the concept was never really investigated. Would I recommend this? Probably not. Like I'll tell someone to go read something like Foundation or one of the more, I say more classic. This is a classic sci-fi book. But what I'd say one of the more easily digestible or exciting classic sci-fi books. But yeah, don't really like sci-fi.
Next week, we're discussing The Passengers by John Mars, so don't forget to get your comments and thoughts in by Monday the 15th of July at the latest to be a part of the discussion. You can now do this on YouTube, TikTok or Instagram. The following week, we'll be discussing Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, but don't forget if you do need a little bit longer to read a book, we do now list the next 4 books down below, along with the discussion dates. That way you can choose a genre that best suits you, and the best time frame to read it in. Thank you all for joining, and if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It's always appreciated, and I will see you next week. Bye.